My name is Linda Gray, and I'm on the Norwich Energy Committee, and we have organized this workshop this evening. And I want to start off with introducing, you'll see in our, among the participants, we have Carl Chemnitzer and Bill Cable will be our panel of experienced do-it-yourselfers on e-bike conversions. And I want in particular to thank the Norwich Women's Club because they gave our committee a grant so that we could purchase a bike, and we could purchase a motor kit and a battery and some other materials to go along to do this conversion. So without their funds, we would have been stuck. And then I also want to give a big thank you to CATV because CATV helped out and did the video recording of the workshop or of the conversion. That's going to be the principal aspect of our presentation tonight. And then I want to give again a major thank you. I want to thank Carl again because he's the fellow who did the work. He's done this. He narrated it, and he and Bill are gonna be able to answer questions as we go along tonight. What we'll do is we're going to show the video recording of the conversion that Carl did in his workshop in Heartland, and we have identified for ourselves a number of different reasonable stopping points. So we're going to be pausing along the way, 6 or so times through the hour-long thing. So we'll welcome you all to raise your questions when we take those pauses, or if you don't have questions till the end, you can bring them up then. You can use the chat function of Zoom to post your questions, and then when we've taken pauses, feel free to unmute yourself, and then you can ask questions at that time as well, if you like. And that gets me to the point that we would like everybody except our speakers to mute yourself unless you have a question to ask during one of our pauses. So the other thing that I just want to cite is that Bill and Carl and I are with our various town energy committees. That includes Norwich, Heartland, and Cornish for Bill, and we've been participating this summer in the e-bike loan program, and that's kind of the springboard for, I hope for many of you, the springboard for your interest in e-bikes, and it's certainly been a springboard for our committee's activities along these lines. So we're very much hoping, and we've seen great enthusiasm, and so we're very much hoping that we're introducing lots of people to the idea of using e-bikes to transform how they get around. I will stop now, and I'm going to mute myself, turn it over to Carl, and I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I'll just get going on the video, and then Carl, the video has Carl explaining things, and so he doesn't need to say a lot till we take a pause and have questions to go for. So here we go.
Okay, so this is a workshop about putting an electric motor on a bike, and the reason for doing this is because if you have DIY talent, the abilities to work on projects yourself, like you go to Home Depot, that you can save a significant amount of money and probably come out with a bike that is equal to and sometimes better than most factory-made bikes that you'll be paying a lot more money for. You can come up with a very nice bike for about $900. And that's comparable to roughly about a $3,000 factory-made bike. It takes a little bit of care. You're going to have to put some extra work into it to be sure that all the details turn out okay. But it's worked out well. I've done a dozen of them so far, and they've turned out very nice. So what we're doing is we have a mountain bike, and I like mountain bikes because they're strong. They have a good stiff frame. I've tried putting an electric motor onto a road racing bike, and it worked out, but because the road frame was so lightweight, there was some flexing in it when the extra power was turned on. And the person still rides the bike, but it's a mountain bike is a lot more robust and a lot stronger as far as putting a motor onto it. So we have a regular mountain bike here, and what we're going to be doing, this is a motor that we'll add on. There's several different kinds of motors. There's a motor that you can put in the, it's called a hub motor. It fits in the rear wheel, and you replace the rear wheel, and then you have to put the battery and controller on. The last several motors that I've done have been bottom bracket motors. They go in place of the pedals. And the nice part about that is that with the bottom bracket motors, when you shift, you're actually shifting for the motor as well as for yourself. And when you have a hub motor, you're not shifting the hub motor, so you don't have the gear reduction advantage for climbing hills. So a bottom bracket motor climbs hills, you shift down for the hills, and then you shift up for the flats, and it just works out much better in our area. And then after we put the motor on, I'm particularly fond of this style of battery pack. This is called a dolphin because it kind of looks like a dolphin nose. It's a Chinese named most of the battery packs, and were in tune with fish when they named it. There is a rack style. You buy a rack, and it's a double-decker, and they generally have a silver fish battery because the pack is silver in color. And then there's bottle they're called bottle bracket bottle batteries, and they generally are quite small and don't pack a whole lot of battery. With this, you can get a decent amount of energy stored into it. And the reason why I recommend going for as large a battery as possible as you can afford is that you get a longer range. That's the most obvious, but it's also good for it gives you extra power for surges for climbing hills, and it also lasts longer. Generally, lithium batteries like to be about half full. That's how you get the most years out of them. I've just gotten 7 years out of one battery before it died. If you keep the batteries full all the time or empty all the time, you'll probably get a year or two. So if you can aim for it half full, so you charge it up full, go out for a ride, and then when you come back, do not charge it. Go for another ride or 2 more rides, and try to keep it half full before you plug the charger back into it. And that way you'll get the most years out of your battery. Prices. This is a about 800 watt hours, which is roughly half again to a third again as strong as you'll get. We have a specialized Turbo Como in our Upper Valley e-bike library, and this is roughly about a third bigger than what the specialized has for a battery. And the price on this was $400. Now the motors, this is a Bafang motor. Bafang makes several different types. So I'm using the 750 watt model. The name of the model is BBS02, and I found this is a very nice strong motor. It has a lot of power. It easily puts most of the factory e-bikes to shame. And the case on this is the motor, so it's got excellent cooling. It's very solid. It can take a lot of abuse. There is another motor that I have also put on electric bikes. It's a Tongsheng Motor, which is the motor that we have on our Upper Valley electric bike, the Hard Rock mountain bike. And the difference between the two is the Tongsheng is a little bit smaller and weaker. This is a 750, the Tongsheng is a 500 watts, and 750 is 1 horsepower, and a average rider is going to put out maybe 100 or 200 watts. So that gives you an idea. The 750 is kind of a peak. You're not riding at 750 all the time. But the difference between the two motors is this one's a cadence sensor. The motor turns on when you're pedaling. It just responds to RPM. The Tongsheng is a torque sensor motor and responds to pressure on the pedals. So the harder you press on the pedals, the more the motor turns on. This, I have found with this motor that you can set it up so that this feels just about like the Specialized Turbo Como that we have in our library. It feels quite nice. It does have a little bit of a cadence effect, but it's pretty decent. And the Tongsheng is just about the same. However, you go slower up the hills because it's a weaker motor. So as far as converting, adding this motor to this bicycle goes, let me start in on it right now. The first thing we'll do, while you get prepared for the project, is we're going to want to look at the sprockets. The sprockets on this, you're going to have one speed up at the front with the electric motor. You can do 2 speeds, but it's going to cost you're going to have to buy some adapters, and you're going to have to fuss with it. And to be honest, I found that 1 speed is perfectly fine. I ride around basically mostly in the top gears on my e-bikes, and only for steep hills do I shift down because of the motor's advantage. So when you're ordering the motor, the sprocket that you get on the motor, you can get different sizes. And basically you would be using a large one if you had a 20-inch wheel, because you're aiming to have a normal pedal cadence of about 60 to 90 cycles per minute at about 20 miles an hour. So paying attention to your gearing, 52 tooth will work out for most 20-inch wheels. I'm using a 46 for a 26-inch wheel, and if you have like a 700C tire or something bigger, you can go down to a 44 or 42, something like that. And if you want to play around, you can get adapters that will fit regular sprockets, regular bicycle sprockets, so that you can put whatever size chainring you would like onto your motor. For this bike with a 26-inch wheel, I'm going with a 46-inch sprocket in front. And then if you have a bike that has road bikes don't have a very wide spread in their sprockets. So if you have a bike like that, you should probably think about replacing either the rear freewheel or the rear cassette, whatever your bike has. If they unscrew off, you'll need a tool for unscrewing it. But what you're looking for is a standard like 11 or 12 tooth on the small sprockets, so that you get a high speed on the flats. And then you want something pretty big, like 32, 34, 36 on the largest sprocket for climbing hills. Now, as I'll quick mention here, as far as special tools go, you may or may not need the special tool for taking off your sprocket, but you will need a tool for removing the pedals, and a tool for taking the chain apart, and also another tool for taking the bottom bracket out. And each of these tools can be had for somewhere around $8 to $12. So you're not looking at a budget buster here. Just be prepared that you will need to get a couple extra tools. The bottom bracket tool here, I should mention, manufacturers in their infinite wisdom have managed to come up with about a dozen different styles, so you may need to be sure that you get the right tool for your bottom bracket. Some bottom brackets use a serrated teeth. Others have special wrenches. Well, actually, kind of the other end of this looks like one of the wrenches. It's got a point, and the point digs into it. And if you get really stuck, you can just use a plain old big pair of pliers to try and get it off. That will work in some cases. So coming back to the sprockets, we're going to want Let me get around this side here and put on some gloves because chains are usually pretty dirty. So what we want is, if we're going to want to make sure we end up with the right size chain. And I always put on a new chain too, because we're talking about more power. And in general, the chains on bikes generally are kind of worn and generally need to be replaced. So what we're doing to make sure the chain comes out the right length is we count the teeth on here, on the old sprocket, and count the teeth on here. So say if this was a 44 tooth and that's a 46 tooth, you know the chain has to be 2 teeth longer. And the same thing back here. If the big sprocket is a 30 and this big sprocket's 36, then you know you need to have 6 more teeth in the chain. And that gets you in the ballpark. You may have to fuss with it a little bit, but what you're attempting to do is you want the derailleur to be there on the big gear and to be back here on the small gear, and that way it stays in the center. You don't want this to be stretched way back here, and you don't want it to be stretched way forward. That's what you're aiming for. We'll work on the motor part first, and then I'll go up to the controls, and the last thing I'll do is the battery. And we do it in that order because you don't want to turn power on until all the connections are done. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'll take the chain off, and I'm using my chain tool. All it does is press one of the pins out. If you have a bike that has been worked on by a shop, there is a chance that your chain may have a quick link in it, in which case you don't have to use one of these. You can, if you find it's quick link, generally you press them together and push together and they will snap apart. But for the most part, with a bike that hasn't been worked on before, you'll have to press a pin out of the chain. So with the chain off, what I do is I just lay them out side by side and take the new chain. Now the chains come in different widths. The older 5-6 speeds are going to be a wider chain and then when manufacturers started putting in the more speeds on the backs of the bikes, they had to make the chains narrower. So when you get a chain, be sure to get the right width for your particular number of speeds. So all I do is I lay the chains out side by side, and these replacement brand new chains usually come with 116 links, sometimes 120. So you just lay them out side by side, add in the extra teeth that you needed, and I've done this ahead of time. I needed four extra teeth, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so that's where I split off the extra. Now with that done, we get the old chain out of the way because it's kind of dirty and greasy. And there's the links. So the links just pop together on a quick link. And that's what we'll be using to put the chain back together. Now, as I take the bikes apart, I have found that pretty much all the parts that I take off will fit into a large Ziploc bag. So in case anybody wants to put a bike back together, I just throw everything into a Ziploc, and you have everything, all the parts for later reassembly if you decide. One thing that I like to do is you need to hold the bike up, and I have found that exercise trainers like this, the collapsible ones, work quite well. They actually work better than the usual bike work stand, because the motors and batteries are heavy and you're putting some force onto it, and the work bike stands, I'd say about half of them are kind of lightweight and the bike moves all over the place. You can steady them up by putting a chair underneath the front tire or something like that to make it not move around as much. But these things are meant for somebody to sit on and pedal, And so they're very heavy duty. They keep the bike firmly in grip. So as you see, normally there would be a wheel for spinning back here for some resistance for the exercise. I've taken that off. There. So you can put a lot of force on this. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we need to take the pedals off. Now, some pedals are, you might not be able to get a regular wrench in there. You might have to get a narrow wrench to fit that. But for the most part, most bike pedals will fit a standard wrench. We take the pedals off first because, well, it gets them out of the way, but also gives us some extra leverage because sometimes pedals are stuck. And if the arms are still mounted onto the bike, that's like clamping it in a vise. Now watch out, because the right hand pedal is regular right hand thread. The left hand pedal is left hand thread. They do this because the pedals would unscrew by a process called precession during riding. Normally the left-hand thread usually has some little ridges on it, and that makes it possible for you to identify which pedal is which. If you're familiar with threads, you can look at the threads and you will see the thread that turns backwards, but for quick identification, the ridges give you an easy way to tell. Okay, now we can take off the arms here. You may find you have a nut in here instead of a bolt. It's not a big deal. The one thing you want to do here is make sure that these threads are very, very clean, because you want to screw your tool in all the way. If you only get it part way in and you put some force on it, you'll pull the threads out, you'll damage it, and then you will have a very hard time getting the pedal off. Okay, so we take this off. And okay, so I'm going to put that into the bag. Same thing on the other side. Okay, so the arms are off. We're not going to reuse these arms because on this side the sprockets are attached to the arms, and that doesn't work with a motor. So when you get your motor kit, you get a new set of arms that don't have any sprockets attached to them. All right, now comes the bottom bracket. You have to pull out this spindle. They're roughly half the time that I've taken these apart, it has been a major struggle to get this apart because they are so rusty. They're stuck in there. Sometimes they will come out easy for you. Other times it will be a struggle. And if you do find a struggle, normally what I would do if it came out easy is I would just put this in there and unscrew it. If it's a struggle, what I do is I put the tool in, and then I have a bolt that I've found that's the right length that screws into the end there to hold it in very firmly so that it can't slip. Okay, so that's in there, and it's not going to bust your knuckles when it slips. And then I get out a very big bar, and then I can unscrew it with a big bar. And so far this has worked on the 50% that have been a problem. Similar to the pedals, one side of this is normal thread and the other side is left-hand thread. But it's the opposite from the pedals because the precession works differently. So the side that you can get to with the gears on is going to be a normal thread. That they set it up, it worked out well because in the old days you used to have to constantly adjust your bearings on the bicycle, so having a normal thread on this side worked with both precession, and also that's why they set up the adjustment. But for this, so then we take this out, and this is a normal thread. I start on this side because this is the side that's, I think of as being removable. And the other side is the side that was meant to be more permanent in behind the sprockets. So this is the left-hand side, left-hand thread, and I'm turning it backwards compared to a normal thread to get it out. Okay. Now this has a cartridge inside it. Your bike may have ball bearings, loose ball bearings, it doesn't matter. All you need is this to be empty. So I take this out. This is usually pretty greasy and dirty. And so, where to go? First thing I do with this is I just toss it in a bag to minimize the damage. And that goes into the bag also. Now, once that's off, I should point out, I should have pointed this out at the beginning. Most add-on motor kits are meant to fit a standard bottom bracket, which is 68 millimeters wide. So we're measuring this distance from one face to the other face. I have an inch ruler here, and it's about 2 11/16 inch, but you're looking for 68 millimeters is the nominal. And you can, the Bafangs, you can put spacers in and go up to, some bikes have 73 width. You can do that, and then they have special motors that are meant for fat tire bikes where they make the bottom brackets very wide, like 102 or something like that. So you can order a motor that size, but the standard motor is going to be for a 68 millimeter wide bottom bracket. So we wipe this out. If it's dirty in there, take a few minutes to clean it so that the motor sits nicely in there. And then before we go any further, let's get this out of the way. This is the front derailleur. So we undo the cable. Get the cable out. And we'll just take this right off. And we're going to get rid of, we don't need the cable. I'm just going to pull it out here for the moment, and we'll go back to the motor. So as you can see on the motor, it has, is that visible, the gap in there?
Yes.
So there is a gap, and so this slides right through the bottom bracket. And then once it's through, to hold the other side on, you put on a bracket to fix the other side of it so it's not flopping around loose. So what we're going to do, I always throw just a little grease in here into this area because a lot of water collects in here. And this is kind of rust preventative, corrosion preventative if it's an aluminum frame. It doesn't take much. It's not actually lubricating anything. It's mostly for keeping rust and corrosion out. And then you slide the motor in. So it just slides in there, like that. And then, This goes on this side. I don't use any lubrication on this thread. It needs to stay fastened. That actually Loctite might be better off than using lubricant on it. So we have that on there. And there are little grippy teeth on here that will help keep the motor in place. The other motor that I talked about earlier, the Tongsheng Motor, instead of using grippy teeth, it has a leg that comes out, and you put it fasten a bracket here like you would a kickstand, and that helps keep it from flopping around like this. Now, if you can imagine, the upper loop of the chain is under tension. That's the way, when you press on the pedals on a normal bike, you would be pulling the wheel to get yourself moving forward. So the upper chain's under tension, so similarly, it pulls the motor this way. So I always push the motor tight up against the frame, and then you put on the big nut, the lock nut, and there is an inside and outside on this. The flat side goes in, the rounder side goes out. Okay, so both Bafang and Tongsheng give you a wrench with the motor to fit their particular nut. The wrench that they give you comes plain like this, and then they tell you to torque it to a torque, and of course you can't fasten a torque wrench onto this. So the way around it is, if you drill a 3/8 hole and then take a file and make it square, it will fit onto a 3/8 torque wrench. Okay, so this big nut is supposed to be 50 to 60 Newton meters, and when you convert that to foot-pounds and then you add in the extra distance for an extension on a torque wrench, it works out to 31 foot-pounds. And you'll have to do the calculation depending on where you drill your hole. It'll vary, but I put it about in the middle and it came out to 31. Okay, so there's 31. And this is pressed up against the tube. Okay, so that's on. Now I'll come back to this, two small screws, and finish tightening them up. They don't give you a torque on this, but I go until I can just feel the Allen wrench spring just a little bit. And that's it. The motor's installed. Now we spend a fair amount of time fussing around with the other part of it.
Linda?
Yes.
So there are a bunch of questions in the chat, and I've tried to type in some answers, and they're piling up together. It's not working too well for me, so I could try to answer a couple of them right now, if that's okay. All right, so we did put together a handout. It's just a short list of vendors and some tools, and we'll show that at the very end, and I suppose we could get a copy to everybody that would like it. Front wheel conversions. The front wheel conversions, the ones that I have driven, it's best when you accelerate if you're going straight. If you accelerate in a corner, it tends to affect the steering a little bit. And if you got a very strong motor, it's not that pleasant. I like front wheel conversions mainly for 250 watt, the smaller size motors that and also front forks aren't as robust. If you want to do a hub motor, which I've done half a dozen of, I highly recommend putting it in the rear wheel instead of the front wheel. It's not as easy, but it's not that hard. However, if you can convince yourself to do a bottom bracket, you get the benefit of shifting. So that's even much better performance on your bike. And then there's a question about how the battery works for pulling. So big batteries. I have cargo bikes, and I've been using a 1,000 watt-hour battery on them, and I have routinely, for the last 3 years, I have ridden up to White River Junction, got groceries, carried recycling up and got groceries, and come back with about 60-pound payloads, and they work fine. It's a 750 watt hub motor that I was using, and they pull quite good. You have to get a fairly big battery. I wouldn't recommend anything smaller than like a 600 watt hour. And then the next one is iMotor. So I kind of entered, well, you want the front hub because it's a single speed cruiser. Yeah, I suppose you could do that, but again, I wouldn't make it too strong of a motor. They do make adapters if you want to put a bottom bracket in an old single speed bike that will adapt from a smaller bottom bracket tube to the wider diameter that you would have. And what else? I think that's it for now.
They do give you a lock nut that goes over that. And it's a lock nut and kind of a trim cover. So that helps hold it in place. That goes to 15.5 foot-pounds. Okay, we should probably finish up the mechanical installation before we get into the wiring. So I'll come back here. So we take our chain that we'd already figured out the correct length on, and we thread it through. So I don't know if you can show this. So this would be a derailleur that's too far back, and that's a derailleur that's too far forward. This is a short chain. This is a chain too long. So basically you want the derailleur running around here for the correct size chain length. Okay. And then we install our quick link. And that's it. So the new chain's on. And then we'll put a cover on. The Tongsheng, the chain guard comes attached already from the factory. With a Bafang, after you get done with it, you have to put in five little screws from the back side here to hold the chain guard on. When you're doing it, don't tighten them up too tight. This is just plastic. It's possible to strip them out. Alright, with that on, we can put this back on. So right on the pedals, right is right, and it's labeled right. Make sure there's no dirt or trash on here. If something's in there, you might end up with a wobbly pedal. You'll have to ride back home and tighten it up. So you can see why they give you a new arm, because the old arm with the sprockets on it would not work in this situation. Okay, now that that's done, I will switch over to the handlebars. So I'm going to push this back a little bit so you can see it a little better. Now on this particular bike, the brake lever and the shifter lever are one unit. So normally what you would do, the kits come with new brake levers. You replace your old brake levers, and the idea with this is you want brake levers that have a switch on them to shut off the motor. So if you get into an emergency situation and you grab the brakes, it just shuts the motor off. The problem with this bike is you can't replace this because it has the shifter built into it. So there's two ways of getting around it. The more common way is you use, instead of that setup, you stick this on with double-faced tape next to your brake lever, and then you also stick a magnet on with double-faced tape, and they have it worked out, the dimensions, so that when you pull your handle and the magnet goes away from it, it flips the switch inside here and turns off the motor. This is very commonly used on bikes that have hydraulic brakes. But for this particular bike, with this kind of shifter, what I use is a third type of sensor, and this slips over the brake cable. And there's a rubber donut inside here, and when the rubber donut slides back and forth on the cable, it flips the switch inside here. So this is the kind to use for this particular bike of the three. So I'll disconnect the brake cable. Now, as far as these little most cables are going to have a little aluminum sleeve over the end so that you don't poke yourself on the sharp ends of it. You can generally squeeze on the crimp and get it to come off. You may be left with a very frayed up end, in which case you need to twist it back together. And if you're going to use one of these brake sensors, that end has to fit through the sensor. So it can't be all raveled and frayed. It has to be tight back together. So what I do in that case, if I know I'm going to be using a sensor, is I'll just solder the wire. I take a small soldering iron. If you have a galvanized wire, you can use regular electrical rosin core solder and just wet it and get the wire to stick together. If you have stainless steel for your cable instead of galvanized, then you need to step it up a notch. And you'll need to use something like silver solder with a very aggressive flux to grab onto the stainless steel. Alright, so I'm going to pull the cable out. And we have the cable. Now's a good time to just take an oily rag and wipe your cable clean while it's out too. It's just basic bicycle maintenance, electric bike or not. Your brakes will be smoother. Okay, so then you take your switch, and the switch, there's the switch, and it's got an arrow, and that's the direction when you do the brakes, when you grab the handle, that's the direction you want the wire to go in.
Hi, and we thought we would pause here very briefly and just note that the captions indicates that Carl had done it this time the wrong way, and then he fixed it up. Carl.
Yeah, so I did. I put it. We changed it out right when I got it through and realized I had made a mistake. I do want to mention that these sensors come with the wire coming out either direction. You can order it, so you don't have to put this sensor up at the handle. You can also put it at the caliper or the brake disc too. There's one bike that I had, they had very strange brake lever up at the front, and so I had to, on the rear brake, I used one of the reverse direction sensors.
So we're going to want the wire to go through from this direction, and this is where you have to stuff it through the little rubber donut in the middle there. And then because this body was built to go in either direction, you have to put the adapter on that allows it to fit into your handlebar there. Alright, so I've threaded this onto the cable, and slid it up to the handle with the adapter, and now we put this back into the original cable. And this goes back on. And I'm just doing normal adjustment. I'm screwing this in all the way. Just generally, this particular caliper is not on the stop. It's up a little ways. So we lightly tighten it. Does the wheel still spin? Yes. Are we about 1 inch away from the handlebar? Yeah. Okay, so good. I'll tighten it. The brake's working. Then we do the same thing to the front. Put on the adapter and put on the sensor. Okay, so you can feel it as you slide it back and forth. You will feel there's stiff resistance, the rubber donut sliding on the cable, but it easily slides the amount that you would do when you're pulling on the handles, on the brake levers. So we slide that back up here and put this back in. And do the same thing. So this is screwed in almost out of the way. This comes up off of its stop a little ways. Well, it should be about right. Okay, does the wheel spin? Oops. Yes. And does the handlebar? Yeah, okay, I'll go for that. So now we have brake switches on both brake levers. The next thing to do is we need to get rid of the front shifter cable. We don't have a front shifter anymore, so I'm just going to take the cable right off.
This is another spot we thought we'd stop, and I don't know whether any questions have arisen or if anybody has any. You're welcome to raise them.
Removing the front brake cable, front shifter cable here is particular to this type of handbrake and shifter setup. You might not have to do it on your bike.
We'll take the cover off. Because you don't need the shifter on this side, you could just go ahead and take this off and put the regular handle on. But in order to make it match, the bike looks nicer if you just leave the two stock handles on there. So now let's pull the cable out of there. And we'll take off the adjuster. There we go. With that out of the way, I'll just pop the cover back on. And because there's a hole right here, in order to make it look pretty, I'll throw a bolt back in there. And this is the same size thread as bottle brackets. So you could just use a bottle bracket bolt. Keep a little bit of rain and dirt out of the mechanism in there. Okay, so that's done. And then the next thing we'll do is we need a display. With a Bafang motor, I think there are 11 different displays that you can get, ranging from very simple black and white ones to fancy ones that are either vertical or horizontal that have many different colors. The one that I've chosen for this has a fair amount of info on it, and it's a color one. I like it. It looks pretty. But it's also got a big speedometer up the top, and it's also got a watt meter on the bottom, and that's the reason why I chose this particular model. Now, yeah. So these are springy, and being careful not to break them. They could take a fair amount. It just slips over the handlebars. Okay, so kind of center it and kind of face it towards. You can move it around a little bit once it's mounted, but somewhere around like that. And we'll just tighten it up. Okay, now on this display has a keypad with a plus and minus that most electric bikes and an on-off button that most electric bikes come with. So all I do for that is I kind of wrap this to get it out of the way, and it's the same springy. If you're not awful with it, it can take a fair amount of abuse. These are getting to be very small little screws, so they're getting hard to hang on to. It used to be the Swiss that made the precision watches with the tiny screws. Now when you try to do kits from China. Okay, so I'm standing about where I would be riding, and I kind of, yeah, right about there. So now you have your on-off and your plus and minus. And let's see, what else? Oh yeah, so then the last thing on the handlebars is the thumb throttle. You do not have to put this on. This, when you press on it, it turns on the motor. And generally, I like to put them on the right-hand side of the handlebars because that's the way mopeds and motorcycles are. They have the throttle over on the right-hand side, so I put this on the right-hand side. It's kind of a worldwide standard. In order to get this on, unfortunately, we're going to have to pull this stuff off because this does not expand over the handlebars. You have to slide it on from the end. Now, on most bikes, do not have a hand grip like this. This hand grip is held on with 2 Allen screws. What did I just do with a knife? It's also got a cap in the end of it here. The cap generally just pulls out. It's just a little plug to seal up the hole. And then you undo the screws. Now, most bikes do not have that. They have a hand grip that you press on. And in order to get that off, one of those, it's kind of like the old finger puzzles that I grew up with, where if you pull, it grips tighter, but if you push on it, it comes loose. So I took a big washer and cut a slot in it, and on those type of hand grips, then you're pushing. It gives you something to push against the hand grip, and the hand grip comes off much easier. Okay, then the hand grip goes on, the thumb throttle goes on. Now it has to slide over this bend, and it'll do it. Yes. Put this back on. So I'm putting this on so the end of the grip is flush with the end of the tube. And I'm also putting it so the bump and the bumps line up here. Put our rubber plug back in and line this back up. We have to tighten this back up. And so I'm putting it so that in rest position it's high, and you can press it down with your thumb. It's comfortable about like that. So one last piece to put on the front end here. About half the kits come with a headlight, and half of the kits do not. The motor has a set of wires coming out of here and you're able to press and hold the plus button and headlights will come on. So so I generally order the kits that come with a headlight because it's set up for it. And for that, I just generally on front wheels there's a hole meant for either headlights, reflectors, or fenders. And so I just use that. I find a bolt that fits. And that's it for the controls. Now we have a bunch of wires. So we'll start connecting the wires up. With a Bafang, they give you a harness that connects all the wires together. So I'm going to gather them together, and I generally run down the left side of the frame because the gears are on the other side, and it just is neater. So I gather everything together here. These two yellow ones are brakes. You can only put these together one way. They made the plugs different, so you can't make a mistake on it. However, there are very, very tiny little pins in here. So they put arrows on here, and you need to be careful about lining up the arrows so that you don't break the pins. Okay. Now this last one, the green one, is the one for the display, and it's also the one that you use. It connects to the computer and the motor, and this is the one, if you're going to program this, you can program the motor. This is the one that you would connect into.
And we wanted to pause here so that Carl could explain a little bit about the programming.
Okay, so there are settings on the display that you can put in the basics, like choose imperial units or metric units or the tire size so that the speedometer reads right, and things like that. But with the Bafang and the Tongsheng, you can also set some of the parameters that are inside the motor, such as the maximum watts and also the boost levels for at the different levels of pedal assist. And that's the difference. One of them, the smaller settings can be done through the keypad, and the more serious ones you plug into the cables that go into the motor. And the picture that just went by was that cables, one end of them connects to your laptop to a USB port, and the other end connects to your bike. And then you use the software's free, and there's generally about 35 settings, I'm going to say. Most of them don't make a difference. The pedal assist levels are the ones that are the most important. But for the most part, you don't have to do that unless the bike will run without doing those programming.
Now, as you can see, there's 5 wires here. It's kind of a mess. You can put a little zip tie on here, which is what most people would do. Since I've done several of these bikes, I sprung for, you buy a spiral wrap in like a length of 2 meters, and you cut off a short piece of it. And then you just use this to tidy things up. Okay, so that's a lot nicer. Now with that done, I'm just going to throw one zip tie right here. Okay, we're out of the handlebars. So this is just like most bicycle speedometers. You have a sensor and you have a magnet, which I took the liberty of pre-installing, and they have to line up to each other. And it is this wire here. And generally I try to wrap it so that it avoids the tire. If you want to get fancy, you can buy a little plastic box that you can put here and stuff all the wires inside it. I have had good luck with the sensors staying where I put them, but they do come with double-face tape. And so clean that off, and then the double-face tape helps to hold it. And there's a little crosshairs right there that you're lining up with the magnet. The gap on Bafangs, I generally aim for about a 1/8 to 3/16 inch gap. The Tongshengs have been very sensitive to the gap. I don't know if they did a bad job on the computer programming or what, but the Tongshengs need between a 10 millimeter to a 15 millimeter gap. It's pretty big. And I'll put on one of these right in the area of the tire here to be sure that the wire doesn't tangle with the tire. If I'm not putting a tail light on this bike because it doesn't have a rack, it doesn't have any place to attach a tail light. But I would also be running the tail light at the same time as I'm putting the zip ties on. So you can get LED tail lights that are meant to match up with the LED headlight that use very little electricity. These are generally about $8 to $11, and I think it's pretty spiffy. Press a button on your handlebars and you have your headlight and tail light come on. It puts me in the same league as Specialized. Actually better than Specialized, because Specialized put their taillight underneath the seat, and when you have something on the rack you can't see the taillight. Okay, so now we'll do the battery with that out of the way. When I first started buying batteries, things were kind of catchy. They were they were getting made in small shops over in China, and you were kind of taking your best shot at what you could, as to the quality of it. But now they're coming through with CE certification, ROH certification. They also have FCC for the controller that's inside them. They're certified. They're turning out to be quite nice quality nowadays. They've gone through, I've used 4 different styles of this dolphin case. The one I'm using right now, I really like this one. It has 4 tabs. The earlier versions had only 2, so this is much more secure for mounting it. And this one here also has a long aluminum channel. The early ones only had a short aluminum channel, so it was much harder to mount the batteries onto the frames. This gives you a lot more options. It's got big contacts and the aluminum channel and the 4 tabs. This is a much better case. While I've got this easy to show you, the charger just plugs in right here. It's like plugging in your laptop. When you have this mounted on your bike, you lock the battery on. All it does is there's a plunger that comes out. That's all it does. And the reason why you should lock it on is so that when you're going down a bumpy road, the battery doesn't fall off.
We want to pause now to just to have a little extra discussion about the battery choices. So Carl's done a good job in the video of explaining how the batteries have evolved, and you can comment maybe a little extra on the choices that one has.
Okay, I think the most important point is get a battery that's fairly decent size. I mentioned earlier that there's 3 advantages to getting a very big battery, and the prices of battery have come down, so it's worth doing now. You can get somewhere between 600 to 800 watt hours is a good size battery. It gives you a lot of oomph for the hills, and it will last longer. It works much better than getting a small 200, 300, 400 watt hour battery. And yeah.
So I'd put this on, and I hold it up. I want a bit of a gap here to allow some bumpy road stuff. So I hold it up in about the right spot, but I want a bigger gap up here because I need to lift the battery up to get it off. So a little gap there, and I flip it over, and the bottle brackets, hang on to it. It looks like this one here would fit kind of nice there into that slot there. So I'll pull this off, and with that there's no problem with the lower one. And what I've found is on our dirt roads that the front tends to go up and down a little bit, so I go through the extra trouble of putting a pop nut up the top. The pop nut, just like the spiral wrap, because I'm doing enough of these, I bought some metric pop nuts that match the regular bottle brackets. They're a 5mm thread. Drill a hole in here, and you put the pop nut in, and it's just like a pop nut gun. You squeeze it, and it flares this out, and you have a nut up the top. Yeah, I should say, for those of you who don't want to buy a pop nut gun, you can take just a regular bolt, and with a bunch of washers and some oil so that it slips nicely, screw that onto there, and then with one wrench holding the top, one wrench on the bottom nut, you can fake it and get the pop nut also installed that way. So that's the pop nut that I installed. And these are the regular bottle mounts. Okay. Sometimes these don't stick up very high, and there is a bit of a gap here. So in order to make it to fit right, I put in a shim washer. Okay, and that's it. And then we check to be sure. And okay, so when you take the battery off, the best way I've found to do it is you put your hand, the back of your hand on the seat tube, and you just push the kind of lever, and that's the easiest way to get it off. Don't push on the bottom part here, push up a little ways, but that gets the battery off. Okay. So I'm going to set the battery over here so nothing's got power while we run through this part of it. Here. Okay, and then we're down to this. As I said, I wrap things around the seat post to get rid of the extra length. Okay, so this is the wire. These are the connections for the headlight. This one here, which I'm going to leave the cap on, is for a gear shift sensor. So it's very much like these sensors for the brakes. When the gear cable moves, it shuts off the motor for a split second. And that's supposed to save some wear and tear on your shifter. I haven't used it yet, and I've got a few thousand miles on these motors now, and it's been okay. I haven't broken anything, and so I just don't install these. But it's possible, if you decide that you want one, it's possible to install it. Okay, so with that there, then we'll connect up the cable from the handlebars. to the, it's plug on the, coming up from the motor. And just like the other one, this one has a lot of tiny little pins in it. So be sure to line up the arrows. And then we're down to the battery. Now, the battery comes from one company, the motor comes from another. You may have to mess with the terminals to get them, you may have to adjust the terminals. In this case, they match. And they're usually installed, so you can only put them together plus to plus and minus to minus. Okay. And that's about it. The one thing I do after this is, I throw on one more zip tie to hold things away from the chain. Away from the chain and the tire too. Just kind of pins everything together. Okay, let's finish up the pedals. And then we're ready to turn it on. Another nice thing about the bottom bracket motors is they have a freewheel inside them so that you can pedal or the motor can run and they're independent of each other. But they had to put the freewheel in to make that work. But the side benefit to that is that if your battery is dead or the motor's not working, you pedal and it's like pedaling a normal bike because there's a freewheel inside there. Whereas if you have a hub motor, the ones with permanent magnets in the motor back here, there's a slight drag and it's a lot harder to pedal. I'm not going to lock it for the temporary. In case I have to bail the battery, I can just grab it and get rid of it. But that's probably an extreme case. It's not going to happen. Okay, so first thing we do is we turn on the battery and wait for whatever. It's looking good. So then we hold down the power. And the screen lights up, so that looks good. And then on this particular display, I don't know if you'll be able to see it on the camera, but this particular display has a light that tells you that the brake light's working, the brake sensors are working. So see, the red came on and I let go and it goes off. So I can check and be sure that the brake switches are working before I turn anything on. It comes up. Here's the nice display with a big speedometer up the top and the power that you're using on the bottom, and then it's got the usual trip and trip odometer and time and stuff like that. So first thing is we can hit the thumb throttle. Okay. So that's working. What I should do is, let's try shifting. Okay, so this is the point where, because you've only got one sprocket up the front, and it may not be in the same place as the old sprockets were, you may have to adjust your derailleur in and out to get the gears all to be there. And right now the gears are, I just went through all the gears and it works. I don't have to do any adjusting. But usually it's just screwing this adjustment in and out a little ways to get it to work right. It's usually not a big change. Okay, so that is the other thing. Okay, and the speedometer is working, brakes are working, we're done.
So that's it. So we're wide open for questions. The one other thing that I will, before we get all done, I'll share the notes that Carl mentioned. So the list of the tools, the considerations when you look at your bike, and then the sources for the motor and the battery that were used in this conversion. But I'll do that in just a few minutes. So meantime, Carl, do you see other questions? And if people could unmute themselves if they have.
There's one question about regeneration. So there's only one motor that can do regen, and that's the hub motor that's a direct drive motor. The geared hubs can't do it. And I have one of those on one of my cargo bikes, and I found that the regen was only worth about 1 to 6% for most rides of the energy. It was a very small amount of energy that I got back. I did manage to learn how to kind of game the system, and was getting closer to 10%, starting out with a sort of empty battery, and then going downhill and things like that. But you don't get a whole lot back from regen on a bicycle. You just don't have the mass and you don't have the speed. It's not like regen in an electric car. For the most part, you're losing most of your energy to air resistance. You're not losing it to elevation climb or momentum.
This is Bill Cable. My first bike had front hub motor with regen, and like Carl said, I found that the regen was not it didn't really amount to much, but it was good as a brake. Like when you're going down a long hill, wear out your brakes, you could use the regen, but it didn't amount to, getting much further distance, really.
Does anybody, Carl, shall I go ahead and show the other lists that we have?
Okay, sure. And I'm also wondering, Bill, do you have any comments about the Tongsheng motor?
No, I just say either mid-drive motor is the nicest bike if you want the bicycle experience, I think. My first bike, like I said, had a front hub motor, and it was a 48 volt. It was very fast, but it drained the batteries pretty fast too. But if you wanted a fast commuter, a big hub motor with a big battery is probably the fastest bike you could get or make.
I've used the hub motors for 3 bikes, and I don't know, probably 8,000 miles. And I now really enjoy the bottom bracket motors because of the hills. When I shift down, it climbs hills so much better than the hub motors did.
And Carl, do you just want to walk through this list about the tools?
Okay, so this is at the very beginning I mentioned you needed a few special tools, and so the puller for the crank arms and the socket for the bottom bracket nuts. You're going to have to get the socket for the bottom bracket nuts to fit your particular bike. And let's see. I'll show you one thing after we stop the screen sharing that may be a big help for a lot of people. And then the other ones you may or may not need. So that's pretty self-explanatory. And then the things you need to look at before you order your kit. If you do a bottom bracket, you need to be sure you've got a bottom bracket that will fit. And also, then you'll need to figure out the gears and the brake switches and which style display. Like I said, there is a bunch of displays. So you can get displays that have USB ports on them, so you can run your your GPS or your phone while you're riding. And I think getting a headlight is a nice perk. These headlights are medium brightness. If you want a blazing torch, you'll have to get something better. But these work pretty well. They're much better than the old-fashioned generator-style lights. And then can you switch to the last part of the second half of this page, Linda?
Yeah. Hold on. Hold on a moment. Technical thing. Hold on just a second.
Okay, so I totaled it up while I was writing this list for Linda today, and I've now bought 20 motors and 22 batteries. So my experience with the vendors is here's a list of them. The individual companies for the motors, they're EM3 EVs in China. Green Tech is in the west coast of Canada. Leaf Bike is in, I forget where, it's Malaysia or something. So they're good. You don't have to worry about getting caught if you order from these companies. However, if you do use eBay or AliExpress, you do get some purchase protection, which is I've used twice in all the purchases, and I've used it on smaller purchases, not on the motors. The people with the motors have generally been good except for one vendor. And the batteries, Bill gets his cells from other places. I found one place in Pennsylvania called Lion Wholesale. Excuse me. And they have been really good. So far, I think I've gotten 2,800 or 2,900 cells from them, 18,650 cells for building packs. And but right now, because of that case, with the 4 tabs on it, I bought the last 10 batteries have been from Unit Pat Power. I really like that case. It's pretty slick. Unicycle, a lot of people like. I haven't used them. And PSW Power was an eBay company that I bought, I think, 4 purchases from. The last one was a Tongsheng Motor. Wouldn't work right. I went through several emails with them, and in the end, they told me to buy a Bafang motor instead. So it was a pretty ridiculous connection with that company. I cannot recommend PSW Power. But otherwise, the rest of the places are pretty good. What can I? Oh, I'll also add, 10 years ago when I started, it was a bit iffy, but the products have really come along. Like I said, on the batteries, they do have certifications now. And the quality is greatly improved, and the motors both motors have been through several updates or revisions, and so most of the problems are all worked out. They're pretty robust.
And I just see the question in chat about getting these lists through email, and because I couldn't identify through the Town of Norwich account that often you can set up a Zoom meeting so that people have to pre-register, and therefore we capture everybody's email. So we were unable to do that. And so what I think would be the best thing is, let me go ahead. I posted to the Norwich listserv, and my email address is very much out there. So let me give you my address, and if you'd like to get this, please email me, and I can just send you a PDF. So that my email is Linda C. Gray, spelled Gray, @gmail.com. I'm going to put that in the chat.
Okay. The one tip that I wanted to give people, for those of you who are not sure about working on your bikes, I have several repair manuals for bicycles, and this one here is by far the best one. It's the Park Bicycles Blue Book. And it goes through just about all the different styles, the different kinds of bottom brackets and things that you will run into and how to deal with them.
have we answered everybody's questions? And Bill, I invite you, if you have other comments that you want to add in for people, because you're an experienced e-bike converter as well. So if there's other topics that you think are worth just tossing out.
Well, I would say, since you're going to spend all this money on a motor and battery, you should probably have a bicycle with disc brakes. I think they go pretty fast, and that I find disc brakes, much, much better. Really prefer them. You can even, you buy a medium grade or good grade Walmart mountain bike, and just start with a new bike like that that's not too expensive. You don't really need a super light bike or anything like that because everything's heavy and it doesn't make any difference.
Yeah, I'll pretty much agree with what Bill said. There was a question in the chat box about can you use a real very inexpensive bike, and you get what you started with. It's like the computer saying garbage in, garbage out. So if you want a nice e-bike, start with a nice one. But otherwise, the motor makes up for a lot, and Bill's right. A decent Walmart bike will turn out okay. The one thing I'll disagree with Bill on is I like rim brakes. I found a good set of rim brakes that are set up nicely work quite well, and the ones that I'm very fond of is the parallel arm. What do you call it? Shimano has a name for it. But the ones with the little noodle on the end for the cable, I find that they give me a fair amount of braking force. Plus, they have a very nice feel to them for soft braking during tricky sections.
And the other thing, in terms of people being able to see this, as Aaron put in the chat, we will end up being able to post. I think it might be useful to do both the plain video that we showed this evening, and make that available, and so that people can just see that. They can watch and they can pause as they want to look at stuff. And then we will also post the recording of this workshop with the question and answer aspects too. So that we'll have information about that on the Norwich Energy Committee website. And I'll put in a very short, version of our URL right here. So that's a short, easy to remember version to get you to our homepage. So it will take a few days until we have that available. If there are no more questions, I think we might go ahead and wrap up. And I hope to see many, many more converted e-bikes out on the road this winter and for sure next spring.
Thank you. Yeah, and we're all Energy Committee people, so don't hesitate to send questions.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye.
you.